do you personally use a tractor more than you would a UTV or ATV for food plots?
I use almost exclusively ATV and UTV.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. The only exception, like right now I'm staring at our cornfield from last year.
Right.
And I have Brandon from First Choice Food Plots. He comes out, friend of mine, but he planted my corn, drilled it in with a Great Plains drill, and he drilled switchgrass in the same day too.
Awesome.
But other than that, all the food plots, I think it would have been 8 acres here and 5 acres, 6 acres over in Coon Valley over in Wisconsin. That was all ATV and sprayer, handheld spreader.
Very cool.
So are you using, as far as a disc or something to turn over the ground, assuming you are doing that, or you're not?
Nope.
You're not discing, you're just drilling?
No, for years. Yeah, and I had a tractor, I don't know how many years, but I put over 500 hours on it up in the UP in Michigan. And it just got to the point where efficiency-wise, it was easier to use the buckwheat no-till, spread seeds into that, call the packet, as opposed to tilling up the soil, putting fertilizer on, then getting my small seeds on, call the packing, changing out implements back and forth. And so this was just, it took 16 hours of planting time for 8 hours and converted it to 4 or 5 hours.
Wow.
And this is all with a drill. You're saying is how you're doing that?
No, we're not using a drill or anything.
Or you're still just broadcasting?
Yeah. And so what I started doing in the early 2000s is I was rotating buckwheat and rye to improve the soil. And even then with a tractor and a tiller, it still was a lot going in there and ripping up that rye or tilling up the buckwheat. And one time, I can't remember, it might have been with the rye, it was old, and the tiller started smoking. Like it was literally about that time with friction to catch on fire. So I went and jammed it down into some sand and got away from that. But anyways, I found with that standing buckwheat crop, let's say I was putting a crop of brassica in August 1st and maybe cereal grains early September, I was spreading that seed right into the standing buckwheat.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd notice on buckwheat, if it's 50 pounds per acre, you're about 4 or 5 inches apart on your stalks. That seed lands down in the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would call the packet and just crush that buckwheat over the seed. And then I follow up with 2 quarts per acre glyphosate. And the reason for that is, say that brassica, those small seeds are, you have that thatch layer of buckwheat over the top. Well, when you spray it with glyphosate, that buckwheat is 80% moisture. It just disintegrates in a week. It turns brown, lets a lot of sunlight in to hit that germinating small seed. The big seeds, it doesn't matter as much.
Right.
And then the buckwheat doesn't have that slow death over a 3-week period or start to perk back up. It just immediately is terminated. And then last year what I started doing is, I'm using the ATV, using a cul-de-packer, and then I'm spraying at the same time. And I use a Packer Max cul-de-packer, which is like a polyethylene tank.
Mm-hmm.
So you can spray it. It's not steel, and it's not picking up soil. So obviously, if you're spraying the cul-de-packer and there's soil on it, it's going to terminate the glyphosate,
right?
And neutralize it. So it was a perfect combination where I turned the sprayer on every other time I went around the field, and that was a great coverage. So I was spraying and cul-de-packing at the same time into a pre-seeded field.
That's awesome.
That's efficiency, man.
I love that. I've thought on multiple occasions about how I might be able to do that. Basically, most of my food plots are getting sprayed 2-3 weeks prior, disked with a ferminator, probably 2 passes, depending on what it is, and then either seeded or cul-de-packed and then seeded and then cul-de-packed again. And then we use DeerGro, obviously, as the treatment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I was looking up this clip while you guys are talking. I wasn't just like surfing the web or anything. Yeah. I don't know if you guys can see this, if that looks okay.
That. Got it.
So that's the last row of buckwheat in that field.
Yeah.
And you can see crushing it's already been seeded. And then you can see that spraying and then the cul-de-packer at the same time. And so that seed is under there. It helps hold moisture against the ground. It conserves your topsoil. It doesn't expose your soil to erosion. So there's a lot of reasons for doing that. And then, I'm using a lot of tillage radish, rye, and so you're putting a lot back into the soil too. And especially with that tillage radish, I usually cut my brassica blend in half. So if it's 6 pounds on the bag per acre, I'm cutting it to 3. And then I'm replacing that half acre that you lose with 7 to 8 pounds of tillage radish.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're avoiding compaction,
getting that aeration.
You're putting nitrogen into the soil back for the following spring with that rotting husk under the soil. And so you can complete these rotations over and over again. And even in my brassica, I'm only planting on half the field and then I'm rotating.
Sure.
So, and then with that follow-up spraying too at the same time, then any of those little broadleafs that are under there, under the buckwheat, you're getting a good kill in there at that time too. So you're really maintaining your weeds. A lot of times there's a lot of times where I've sprayed 3 times. I'd spray early May, mid-June, end of July. And then I'm just throwing my brassica seed on the soil. And then 5-6 weeks later, I'm throwing my rye and maybe wheat and the oats on the soil, and you can get a great food plot, and then you can keep rotating it, but you're spraying 3 times
Mm-hmm.
and you're not building the soil at all, really.
Right.
And so the buckwheat helps improve the soil. It's a great smother crop for weeds. And so then you never have to till. It's and so a lot of times I'm working with clients that they're thinking about buying an expensive tractor, and really, and they're looking at it, yeah, this is a 2-3 year plan where they can just use their ATV, get started right now. And everyone has to buy a tractor someday.
Yeah.
And you know, they got to get through the tractor bug, and then use tractor long term. I mean, of course, pulling drills, planting corn, there's a lot of applications, but just for pretty effective weed-free food plots in an efficient manner, there's a lot you can do with, you know, those buckwheat rotation, and buckwheat's hard to find, I hear.
Well, yeah, that's
Right.
what I was gonna say. Frankly, I'm almost unfamiliar with buckwheat. I've never planted it.
What is
before.
buckwheat, and when do you plant it?
Yeah, there you go. Give us some basics there, Jeff.
Well, with buckwheat, it's a small brown seed. It almost looks like a small beech nut husk type seed. It's a little bit triangular, dark. It really sticks out on light soil. And the thing about buckwheat, it's stalky, holds a lot of moisture. It's actually it's fairly drought proof too. But what it does is it's pH tolerant, poor soil tolerant. So it's a great rotation crop for building soil. One thing you have to really be careful with buckwheat is there's a lot of people going out right now and planting it. And in the UP, I've had a few failures, but if you get just a small amount of frost, it kills it.
Really?
You really have to, you know, most areas, north half of the country, upper Midwest, you're looking at that Memorial Day time. But if you see a chance of low 30s in the forecast, you better not plant it because it'll pop up pretty quick. You can throw it on bare soil, get a little bit of rain, it'll germinate easily. But I lost a buckwheat crop on July 4th, right around that time in the UP of Michigan, because we had snow and freeze.
That's insane.
So it just
in July.
the crop.
That's crazy, man.
So with buckwheat, like, you know, we were talking before you guys jumped on, Jeremy, about, you know, a lot of guys calling in on the DeerGro side, planting buckwheat, but a lot of people, including myself, like looking at buckwheat as an option for like a newer food plot. But a lot of people are trying to decide between more of like the forage bean and pea side versus the buckwheat side. So I didn't know if you could clarify, like on the nutrition side, protein side for that summer.
I guess that's where I was going to go from an attraction and a nutrition side, Jeff. How does buckwheat compare to some of the other summer options, I guess we would have in a food plot?
And I'm still trying to understand. Buckwheat is a summer option.
Yes.
So you plant that like typically
May, June.
Same time frame as beans or slightly
I look
before.
for, like, if I'm using it as an ultimate no-till, where I'm using you know, light equipment, and I'm spreading that seed in there and then crushing the buckwheat and doing that rotation. I want the buckwheat planted for about 7 weeks, somewhere around there, 8 weeks at the most, 6 weeks. So you're timing your buckwheat planting with when you'd plant your cool season.
So almost backdating from, if I'm planting April or August 1st, then I'm coming back to June 1st of when I'd want my buckwheat in. Okay.
Yeah, right. So this is maybe, it's probably unconventional, but one of the things I really look at, like, for example, here in where I'm at in Minnesota, we have a lot of agriculture around us. I'm not trying to build a deer herd as far as grow numbers. At the same time, there's so much food around here that the deer don't need what I offer during the summer. And so I'm looking at it as, I don't want deer on my plots during the summer, because if I establish a huge residency of does and fawns, they just hammer my cool season annuals as soon as they start to come up. I'd rather have a little lag time where those does and fawns have established their summer residency and fawning ground somewhere else. And then there's a 3, 4, 5 week lag time where it allows that cool season annual to get some volume before they slowly start to trickle back on. And so, you know, around here, the previous landowner had this property for 7 years. He just planted beans. He had about 5 acres. Well, if you look at the real estate listing, probably 20 out of 25 pictures were in velvet of bucks. And it's because those bucks were there during the summertime but then the beans were gone in early October.
Yep.
And then other than having the random rut bucks coming through, a lot of those deer were gone because they didn't have that cool season annual. So a lot of times I see people putting a priority on summer plantings at the expense of their fall plantings. And if you look at those deer numbers, that can really explode. So in the UP in Michigan, I relied on clover heavily for the first 5-6 years during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me build a herd. I mean, in 99, I got a picture of one spike 3 times, and then found one rub and one scrape. And then go to 2006, we had 17 bucks, passed up 11, shot 2. And, the deer herd just exploded in a small deer herd area. And so around that time, 2005, 2006, I stopped planting clover because I wanted there to be more volume going into the fall. And I found there's so much food, 5 times more in the north that the deer need during the summer. So it's kind of that weight. And then if you're using heavy rye, you're hitting that 2 to 4 week window before spring green up where the deer is hammering the wheat and rye. And that's a real mess time in the whitetail woods. So kind of like, when do you need the food the most?
Yeah.
But that's why a lot of times, so buckwheat, the deer don't hit as much during the summertime. Like in ag area here, they barely touch it.
Really?
Right.
I want to go to your buckwheat planting thing real quick before I miss it. So in order to plant the cool season or your fall food plot into the buckwheat, you need to have previously gotten rid of any of the thatch that exists when you're planting the buckwheat, correct?
No, he's planting it underneath it. So he's
Well,
putting seed down and then dropping.
Well,
the
but I
buckwheat
couldn't,
over
for
top.
instance, I couldn't just spray and then plant buckwheat and then go and try to plant brassicas because there's still going to be this layer of thatch that I've never gotten rid of. Right.
That layer of thatch, we'll start in the spring, new food plots here. I'm actually spraying tomorrow on the new property tomorrow and Sunday or Saturday. And I'll spray those new fields. They haven't been planted in about 12 to 13 years. There's a lot of thatch there, but if you go there right now and you kick the thatch, you're hitting soil under your boot, and it really disintegrates. It's crazy how you can have 15 years of thatch and really it boils down to about a 1/2 inch layer of garbage on top. So if I start hitting that with chemical right now and I limit the weed growth in the
I'm
spring.
really curious about that, Jeff. How frequently you're spraying
on those new plots. And I have some videos out there, 3 no-till, 3 sprayings in a planting or no-till plantings for food plots, but you're spraying early May, mid-June, end of July. And by then you have open soil enough to where you're looking at it's probably 80% soil exposure.
See, we've I've heard of guys doing that. I don't think Jeremy or Weston or I have ever sprayed more than 2 to 3 weeks prior or more than a single application of glyphosate.
Well, and I think a lot of that is because we're trying to kill knowing that we're going to disc versus what Jeff's doing is he's trying to kill, not disc, just have bare soil, seed, pack over the top. So essentially you're conserving the topsoil, conserving water moisture as well.
Well, from a plant, from a buckwheat planting perspective, not really necessary. Right? Can you drill buckwheat?
Yes, you can drill buckwheat. It's a pretty large seed, so it's easy to drill. But what I'm doing a lot of times, as long as that buckwheat can get on the soil in the spring, that's your main concern. So you might have a previous food plot, you might have an area that has a lot of thatch, but I'm looking at my first spraying would be right now, and then I could get at least one more spraying in before I'd put that buckwheat down. And so by then, when you're exposing that dried, dead grass and debris to the sun and wind, a lot of times you might find that you have good, adequate soil exposure by early June. Again, it's end of April right now. So you get at least 2 good sprayings in starting early right now.